It was a cold, damp evening, and the city streets glistened with the remnants of a steady rain that had fallen all day. Liam Cross, a man whose very name was synonymous with wealth and success, was driving home in his sleek black car. The city skyline sparkled in the distance, a reminder of the empire he had built. The rain-soaked roads were nearly deserted, and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers filled the otherwise silent car. Liam, a man always consumed by business, had little time for distractions, especially not tonight after an exhausting day of board meetings and financial negotiations. As he approached a dimly lit bus stop, something caught his eye. Sitting on the bench was a young boy, no older than 10, huddled under a tattered hoodie that did little to shield him from the cold rain. His small frame shivered visibly, and his face was buried in his hands. The sight of the boy crying alone in the rain was jarring. For a moment, Liam's pragmatic mind told him to keep driving. He wasn't responsible for every sad sight in the city, but something in the boy's helpless posture tugged at an emotion Liam hadn't felt in years: compassion. He slowed his car to a stop a few feet away and rolled down the passenger window. "Hey, kid," he called out, his deep voice cutting through the sound of the rain. The boy flinched, looking up cautiously, his tear-streaked face illuminated by the car's headlights. His eyes were red, and his cheeks were stained with dirt and tears, but it was the look in his eyes that struck Liam. A mix of fear, sadness, and something even more haunting: hopelessness. "What are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" Liam asked, his tone more gruff than he intended. The boy hesitated, his lips trembling as he tried to form words. Finally, in a barely audible voice, he replied, "I don't have anywhere to go." The words hit Liam like a blow to the chest. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the raw vulnerability in the boy's voice, or the fact that he looked so young and out of place. "What do you mean? Are you waiting for someone?" Liam asked, stepping out of the car despite the rain. The boy shook his head slowly. "No, nobody's coming. My dad. He told me to wait here. But he's not coming back." Liam stood there, the rain soaking his expensive suit, unable to look away from the boy. The city buzzed faintly in the background, a stark contrast to the stillness of this moment. "What's your name?" Liam asked gently. "Even," the boy said, his voice trembling. "Well, Even, you can't stay out here all night." "It's freezing," Liam said, trying to mask his growing concern. He glanced around the empty street, half expecting someone to appear and claim the boy, but there was no one. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm." Even hesitated, his small hands gripping the edge of the bench. Are you going to call the police?" he asked, his voice tinged with panic. "No," Liam replied after a pause. "Not yet. Let's just figure this out first." Even nodded slowly, and Liam opened the car door for him. As the boy climbed into the warmth of the vehicle, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was going to lead to something far more significant than he could anticipate. He didn't know it yet, but this night would change not just Evan's life, but his own as well. The hum of the car engine filled the silence as Liam drove through the rain-drenched streets, glancing occasionally at the boy seated in the passenger seat. Even sat rigidly, his thin arms wrapped around his chest, as if trying to shield himself from more than just the cold. Liam had spent his life navigating the cutthroat world of business, where every decision was calculated, every action deliberate. But tonight, as he drove a frightened, soaking boy through the city, he realized he was far out of his depth. After a few minutes, Liam pulled into the parking lot of a small 24-hour diner. The neon sign flickered in the misty air, casting an eerie glow on the wet pavement. "Come on," he said, cutting the engine. Even looked at him uncertainly, but followed as Liam opened the door and motioned him inside. The diner was nearly empty, save for a tired-looking waitress behind the counter and an older man nursing a cup of coffee in a booth. The smell of greasy food and burnt coffee filled the air. Liam guided Even to a booth in the corner and handed him a menu. "Get whatever you want," he said, sliding into the seat across from him. Even stared at the laminated menu, his small hands trembling slightly as he held it. He didn't speak, just scanned the options with wide eyes, as if the mere act of being offered food was foreign to him. The waitress approached, her notepad in hand. She looked from Liam to Even, her brow furrowing slightly. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Pancakes," Even said softly. "Please." "And for you?" she asked Liam. "Coffee. Black," he replied. As she walked away, Liam leaned forward, studying Evan. "You said your dad left you at the bus stop. How long were you there?" Even shrugged, staring down at the table. "A few hours, I think. Maybe more. I'm not sure." "Why would he leave you there?" Liam asked, his tone more direct than he intended. Even flinched slightly, and Liam immediately regretted the question. "I mean, do you know where he went?" Even shook his head. "He said he had to go do something, that he'd be back, but he didn't come back." Liam frowned. There was something about the way Even spoke, detached, almost resigned, that didn't sit right with him. "What about your mom?" he asked gently. "She's in the hospital," Even replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "She got sick, really sick. Dad said we didn't have enough money to keep her there." The waitress returned with their food, setting a plate of pancakes in front of Even and a steaming mug of coffee in front of Liam. Even stared at the pancakes for a moment, as if unsure they were real, before picking up his fork and taking a cautious bite. Liam watched as the boy ate with an intensity that suggested he hadn't had a proper meal in days. As Even ate, Liam's mind raced. He had no idea what to do next. Calling social services seemed like the obvious choice, but the thought of handing Evan over to the system felt wrong. The boy clearly needed help, but Liam couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than Even was letting on. "Do you have any other family? Grandparents? Aunts or uncles?" Liam asked after a while. Even shook his head again, swallowing a mouthful of pancake. "It's just me and Mom and Dad. But now it's just me." Liam leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his rain-dampened hair. This wasn't his responsibility. He wasn't a social worker or a charity worker. He was a businessman, a problem solver. And yet, as he looked at Even, he felt a gnawing sense of guilt. Here was a child who had been abandoned, left to fend for himself in a world that didn't care about people like him. Liam had spent his life climbing to the top, building his empire brick by brick. But in this moment, all of that seemed meaningless. Even finished his pancakes and set his fork down, looking up at Liam with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you," he said softly. Liam nodded. "You're welcome, but we still need to figure out what to do." Even hesitated, his eyes darting around the diner before settling back on Liam. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course," Liam said, leaning forward. "My dad, he wasn't always like this," Even said, his voice trembling. "He used to be a good dad, but then he lost his job, and everything started falling apart. He tried to get another job, but nobody would hire him. He said it was because of something that happened at his old job, but he never told me what." Liam frowned. What kind of job did he have? Even hesitated. I think he worked at a big company downtown. He never talked about it much, but I heard him arguing with Mom about it once. He said someone lied about him and got him fired." Liam's stomach sank. He had heard stories like this before, disgruntled employees blaming their misfortunes on corporate politics. But as he looked at Even, he couldn't help but feel that there might be some truth to the boy's words. Liam's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from his assistant, reminding him of an early meeting the next morning. He sighed, realizing that his carefully planned schedule had already been derailed. "Okay," Liam said, standing up and pulling out his wallet. "Let's get you somewhere safe for the night. We can figure out the rest in the morning." Even nodded, his expression a mix of relief and apprehension. Liam paid the bill and led Even back to the car, the rain still falling softly as they stepped outside. As they drove through the quiet streets, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that this night was just the beginning of something much bigger. He didn't know it yet, but Even's story was about to collide with his own in ways he could never have imagined. The rain had lessened to a mist by the time Liam parked in front of a modest motel on the outskirts of town. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly against the otherwise quiet night. Liam stepped out of the car and gestured for Even to follow. The boy hesitated but obeyed, clutching his hoodie tightly around himself, as if it were the only thing tethering him to safety. Inside the motel lobby, the air was stale, tinged with the faint smell of mildew and cleaning products. The clerk, a disheveled man with half-lidded eyes, barely looked up from his phone as Liam approached the counter. "One room for the night," Liam said, pulling out his wallet. The clerk lazily slid a clipboard across the counter. "Cash or card?" Liam handed over his credit card, and within moments, he had the key in hand. He turned to Even, who stood awkwardly near the door, his eyes scanning the room as though expecting trouble at any moment. "Let's go," Liam said, nodding toward the hallway. The room was as basic as Liam had expected. A single bed, a small table with a lamp, and a tiny bathroom. The carpet was worn thin in spots, and the walls were a dull beige. Liam set the key on the table and turned to Even. "It's not much, but it'll do for tonight." Even nodded silently, his small frame looking even smaller in the dim light of the room. Liam realized the boy was still shivering. "You should take a hot shower and warm up," he suggested. Even hesitated, then nodded again. He disappeared into the bathroom, and moments later, the sound of running water filled the room. Liam sank into the chair by the table, his mind racing. This was supposed to be a simple act of kindness. Give the boy a meal, get him somewhere safe, and let the authorities handle the rest. But the more he thought about Even's story, the more unsettled he became. Liam's thoughts drifted to the boy's father, a man Even claimed had been wronged at his job. Could it be possible that Even's father had once worked for Liam's company? The idea seemed far-fetched, yet something about it gnawed at the edges of his mind. Liam prided himself on running a tight ship, but he knew that in a company as large as his, not every decision came across his desk. Could someone under him have made a mistake, an error that cost a man his livelihood? When Even emerged from the bathroom, he looked slightly less fragile. His hair was damp, and the oversized hoodie hung limply on his small frame. "Feel better?" Liam asked. Even nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "Thank you," he said softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Liam glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight, but he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep until he got some answers. "Even," he began carefully, "about your dad. Do you remember anything else about where he worked? A name, maybe?" Even furrowed his brow, thinking hard. "He used to wear a badge with a name on it. I think it said Cross Global." He looked up at Liam, his innocent eyes oblivious to the shock that rippled across the man's face. Liam's breath caught in his throat. Cross Global was his company. He had built it from the ground up, and it was now one of the most prominent corporations in the city. How could this boy's father have worked for him without him knowing? And what could have happened to lead to the events Even described? "Are you sure?" Liam asked, his voice quieter now. Even nodded. "Yeah. He used to tell me he worked for a really big company. He was proud of it. But then, something happened. He said someone blamed him for something he didn't do. After that, everything got worse." Liam sat back, the weight of Even's words settling over him like a heavy blanket. If this was true, then someone in his company had made a decision that destroyed this family's life. And if that decision had been based on a lie, then Liam bore some responsibility, whether he had known about it or not. "Do you know where your dad might be now?" Liam asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Even shook his head, his expression growing more somber. "I don't think he's coming back," he said quietly. "Before he left me at the bus stop, he said he was going to make things right. But he looked scared. I don't know what he meant." Liam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night. This wasn't just a case of a man down on his luck. Something deeper was at play, and the pieces didn't add up. What could Evan's father have meant by making things right? Was he planning to confront someone, seek revenge, or had he simply given up, leaving his son behind because he believed he had no other choice? "Listen, Evan," Liam said, leaning forward. "I'm going to figure this out, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Evan hesitated, his small hands gripping the edge of the bed. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." "Good," Liam said, standing up. "For now, you should get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." Evan climbed under the covers, his body visibly relaxing for the first time since Liam had met him. Within minutes, the boy was asleep, his breathing soft and steady. Liam, however, couldn't rest. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts, searching for someone who might help him untangle this mess. He dialed the number of his assistant, knowing it was late but unable to wait. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice groggy. "Mr. Cross, is everything okay? I need you to pull the employment records from the last 5 years, Liam said, his tone clipped. "Specifically, anyone who was terminated under questionable circumstances. Cross-reference it with any reports of misconduct or accusations against management." There was a pause on the other end. "That's a lot of data to go through," she said cautiously. "Is there a specific reason?" "Just do it," Liam interrupted, his patience thinning. "I need it by morning." "Understood," she said, her tone sharpening with professionalism. "I'll get on it." Liam ended the call and set the phone down, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something far more significant than a single employee's termination. And as he glanced over at Evan, who slept peacefully for the first time in whom knew how long, Liam felt an unfamiliar determination settle over him. This boy's life had been shattered, and if he was responsible, directly or indirectly, then he owed it to Evan to set things right. But as the rain continued to fall outside, Liam couldn't help but wonder, was he prepared for what he might find? And more importantly, could he fix the damage that had already been done? The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains of the motel room, casting long shadows on the worn carpet. Liam sat in the same chair he'd occupied the night before, staring at his phone with bloodshot eyes. He hadn't slept. Instead, he'd spent hours digging into the company's records, using every resource at his disposal to piece together the fragments of Evan's story. His assistant had delivered the requested files promptly, and what Liam had uncovered left him uneasy. 5 years ago, a man named Daniel Greaves had been employed at Cross Global as a mid-level logistics manager. He was well regarded, with consistent performance reviews and no record of disciplinary action, until a sudden accusation of embezzlement had led to his termination. The records were sparse, containing only a vague reference to misappropriation of funds. What struck Liam as strange was the lack of follow-up. No police report, no internal investigation, just a quiet firing. It was as if someone had wanted the matter swept under the rug. Even stirred in the bed, the rustling of sheets breaking the tense silence in the room. Liam looked over to see the boy rubbing his eyes, his expression drowsy but peaceful. For a moment, Liam hesitated. How much of this should he share with Evan? The boy had already been through enough, and the last thing Liam wanted was to burden him with more uncertainty. But if he was going to help, he needed the truth, no matter how painful. "Morning," Liam said, forcing a small smile as Evan sat up. "Did you sleep okay?" Evan nodded. "Yeah. It was nice, not being outside." Liam's chest tightened at the simple statement. He cleared his throat. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something. I did some digging last night, about your dad." Evan's eyes widened, and he straightened in the bed. Did you find him? Not yet, Liam admitted. But I found out he used to work for my company. Cross Global. Even blinked, clearly surprised. Your company? Yes. I'm the owner, Liam said. I didn't know about your dad's situation before, but I found some records. He was fired 5 years ago under questionable circumstances. Even frowned, his small hands gripping the blanket tightly. He always said it wasn't his fault, that someone set him up. Liam nodded. I think he might have been telling the truth. The records don't add up. It looks like someone in my company made sure the whole thing was buried. Even didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be processing the information, his young mind struggling to make sense of it all. Finally, he asked, "What happens now?" "I'm going to find out what really happened," Liam said firmly. "And I'm going to find your dad. But I need your help." Even looked at him warily. "What can I do?" "Think back to when your dad was working," Liam said. "Did he ever mention anyone at the company? A boss, a coworker, anyone he might have had problems with?" Even frowned in concentration. There was a guy he didn't like. He used to call him Mr. Graysuit. I don't know his real name, but Dad said he was always watching him, waiting for him to mess up. Liam's mind immediately went to one of his senior executives, a man named Victor Lyman. Victor had a reputation for being ruthless, someone who valued results over people. He'd been with Cross Global for nearly a decade, and while Liam had trusted him to manage operations, he'd also heard whispers about Victor's cutthroat tactics. "That's a good start," Liam said. "I'll look into it, but there's something else I need to know. You said your dad told you he was going to make things right. Do you have any idea what he meant by that?" Even hesitated, chewing on his bottom lip. I think he was going to talk to someone. He had this envelope. He said it was important. He didn't tell me what was in it, but he said it would fix everything." Liam felt a flicker of hope. If Daniel had been gathering evidence to clear his name, it could explain his sudden disappearance. But it also raised new questions. Where was Daniel now? And who had he planned to confront with the envelope? Liam stood and grabbed his jacket. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going to find some answers." They left the motel and drove to Cross Global's headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper in the heart of the city. As they rode the elevator to Liam's private office, Even looked around with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the sleek, modern surroundings. Liam, however, was focused. He needed to get to the bottom of this, and fast. Inside his office, Liam called his assistant, Sarah, who arrived moments later with a folder of additional documents. "I pulled everything I could find on Daniel Greaves," she said, handing him the folder. "But there's something else you should know." "What is it?" Liam asked, flipping through the papers. "Victor Lyman has been acting strange lately," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "He's been in and out of meetings with legal counsel, and there are rumors he's planning to leave the company." Quietly. Liam's jaw tightened. If Victor was involved in what had happened to Daniel, his sudden behavior made sense. He might be trying to cover his tracks before anyone could uncover the truth. "Where is he now?" "In his office, as far as I know," Sarah replied. "Good. Keep an eye on him," Liam said. "And if he leaves the building, I want to know immediately." As Sarah left, Liam turned to Even. "We're going to pay Mr. Lyman a visit." The two of them made their way to Victor's office, Liam's mind racing with possibilities. When they arrived, Victor looked up from his desk, his expression hardening as he saw Liam and the boy standing in the doorway. "Liam," Victor said, his voice oozing false politeness. "What can I do for you?" "I want to talk about Daniel Greaves," Liam said, stepping inside. Victor's face darkened. "That was years ago. Why are we dredging up the past?" "Because it matters," Liam said, his voice cold. "I have reason to believe you had something to do with his firing. And I want to know why." Victor leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Liam. Greaves was a thief. I was doing the company a favor. Liam narrowed his eyes. Then you won't mind if I review the evidence myself. Victor's smile faltered, and for the first time, Liam saw a flicker of unease. You're wasting your time, Victor said, standing. And frankly, I don't appreciate being accused. I haven't accused you of anything, Liam said evenly. Yet, as Victor brushed past them, his shoulder bumping Liam's intentionally, Liam noticed something peculiar. Victor's desk drawer was slightly ajar, and inside was a thick manila envelope. Liam waited until Victor was out of sight before turning to Even. Stay here. He moved quickly, grabbing the envelope and opening it. Inside were documents, bank statements, memos, and emails, all pointing to a coordinated effort to frame Daniel Greaves. Liam's stomach churned as he realized the extent of Victor's deception. This wasn't just about greed or ambition. It was a calculated effort to ruin a man's life. Even watched as Liam sifted through the papers, his eyes wide. What does it mean? He asked. It means your dad was telling the truth, Liam said grimly. And now we have the proof. Liam stared at the pile of documents spread across the desk, his mind racing. Victor Lyman hadn't just framed Daniel Greaves. He had orchestrated a systematic cover-up to protect his own interests. The emails revealed a pattern of falsified accusations, manipulated financial records, and internal memos, ensuring that Daniel's termination would appear justified. The bank statements told an even darker story, pointing to embezzled funds funneled into a shell account that, according to the records, Victor controlled. This wasn't incompetence or a simple misunderstanding. It was deliberate sabotage. Even stood silently, his wide eyes darting between the papers and Liam's face. He looked nervous, as though he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. So my dad, he didn't do anything wrong? He asked softly. No, Liam said firmly. He didn't. Victor made it look like he did. Even's lip quivered, but he pressed it together, holding back tears. I knew it. Dad always said he didn't do anything bad. He wouldn't lie to me. Liam nodded, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. This wasn't just about clearing Daniel's name anymore. This was about righting a wrong that had devastated a family and exposed a rot within Liam's own company. But before he could act, he needed to find Daniel. Liam grabbed his phone and dialed his head of security. John, I need a location on Victor Lyman. Now. John's voice crackled over the line. He left the building about 10 minutes ago. Looked like he was in a hurry. Track him, Liam ordered. I also need you to locate a man named Daniel Greaves. Cross-check his last known address, any recent activity, anything you can find. I'm on it, John said, hanging up. Liam turned to Even. We're going to fix this, he said, his voice steady. But I need you to tell me something. Do you remember anything about where your dad might go if he was in trouble? Somewhere he felt safe. Even thought for a moment, his small hands twisting the hem of his hoodie. There's this old park he used to take me to. It's near where we used to live. He said it was his favorite place because it was quiet, and he could think there. Liam nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He gathered the documents into the envelope and tucked it under his arm. Let's go, he said. We're not waiting for this to blow over. The drive to the park was tense. Even sat quietly, his hands clasped in his lap, while Liam gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing through possible scenarios. He didn't know what they would find, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. When they arrived, the park was nearly deserted, save for a few joggers and an elderly couple walking a dog. The overcast sky cast a gray pall over the landscape, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth. Even scanned the park anxiously. There, he said suddenly, pointing to a bench near a cluster of trees. Liam followed Even's gaze and saw a man sitting hunched over, his face partially obscured by a worn baseball cap. His clothes were ragged, and his posture spoke of defeat. But even from a distance, Liam could see the resemblance. This had to be Daniel. "Stay here," Liam said, parking the car and stepping out. He approached the bench cautiously, not wanting to startle the man. "Daniel," he called softly. The man looked up sharply, his eyes narrowing. His face was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, but there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze. "Who's asking?" he said, his voice rough and defensive. "My name is Liam Cross," Liam said, stopping a few feet away. "I own Cross Global. I need to talk to you about what happened 5 years ago." At the mention of Cross Global, Daniel's expression darkened. He stood abruptly, his fists clenching at his sides. "You've got some nerve," he spat. "Coming here after what your company did to me." "I know," Liam said, his tone calm but firm. "And I'm here to make it right. I found proof that you were set up. Victor Lyman was behind it." Daniel froze, his anger faltering as confusion crossed his face. "Victor," he repeated, his voice cracking. "Why would he do that?" Liam stepped closer, pulling the envelope from under his arm and handing it to Daniel. "Because he was stealing from the company, and he needed someone to take the fall. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time." Daniel opened the envelope with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the documents inside. As he read, his shoulders slumped, and he sank back onto the bench. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew I wasn't crazy." "Your son knew it too," Liam said, gesturing toward the car. Ethan was watching from the passenger seat, his face pressed against the window. "He never stopped believing in you." Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, he's here." Liam nodded. "He's been through a lot, but he's safe now, and he's waiting for you." Daniel stood slowly, clutching the envelope tightly. "I don't know what to say." "Say it to him," Liam said, stepping aside. Daniel approached the car cautiously, his steps faltering as he got closer. When he reached the door, Ethan flung it open and jumped out, throwing his arms around his father. Daniel dropped the envelope and hugged his son tightly, his body shaking with silent sobs. Liam watched the reunion from a distance, a lump forming in his throat. This was what mattered. Not the money, not the power, but moments like this. Moments where people could find their way back to each other. But Liam's work wasn't done. As Daniel and Ethan embraced, he pulled out his phone and dialed John again. "Did you find him?" "We've got eyes on Victor," John replied. "He's heading toward the airport." "Don't let him leave," Liam said coldly. "I want him brought in. And call the authorities. It's time for Victor to face the consequences." As Liam ended the call, he glanced back at Daniel and Ethan. This wasn't just about justice for them. It was about ensuring no one else would ever have to endure what they had. And for the first time in years, Liam felt like he was finally using his power for something that truly mattered. The air was thick with anticipation as Liam waited outside the Cross Global headquarters, his mind a whirlwind of plans and emotions. John had called moments ago to confirm that Victor Lyman was in custody, detained by airport security under Liam's orders. The authorities were on their way, and the evidence Liam had uncovered was damning enough to ensure Victor wouldn't walk away unscathed. But as Liam stood there, watching Daniel and Ethan sitting together in the backseat of his car, he realized this was only the beginning. After reuniting with his son, Daniel's initial joy had given way to a wary resolve. He had thanked Liam for stepping in, but made it clear that trust wouldn't come easily. Liam couldn't blame him. 5 years of hardship couldn't be undone with an apology, no matter how heartfelt. What mattered now was action, making things right not just for Daniel and Ethan, but for everyone who had been affected by the kind of corruption that Victor had brought into his company. Inside the building, Liam guided Daniel and Ethan to his office. The quiet hum of the employees outside belied the storm brewing behind closed doors. "You'll be safe here," Liam said, gesturing for them to sit. "I've arranged for security to keep an eye on both of you until this is over." Daniel looked skeptical, but nodded, holding Evan close. "I just want to know one thing," he said, his voice steady but filled with years of pent-up frustration. "Why now? Why do you care all of a sudden?" Liam met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I should have cared then," he admitted. "I trusted the wrong people to handle things. That's on me. But now that I know the truth, I won't let it go. You have my word." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but words don't mean much without action." "They won't have to," Liam said firmly. He turned to his phone and dialed a number. Within moments, Sarah, his assistant, entered the room with a laptop and several folders. "Sarah, set up a video call with the board. I want everyone on this." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Daniel and Evan. "Are you sure, Mr. Cross? This could get messy." "It's already messy," Liam replied. "And it's time we cleaned it up." 15 minutes later, the board members appeared on the screen, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Liam didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We have a situation," he began, his voice resolute. 5 years ago, an employee, Daniel Greaves, was wrongfully terminated based on fabricated evidence. That evidence was created by Victor Lyman, who has been embezzling funds and using scapegoats to cover his tracks. The board erupted in murmurs, some in shock, others clearly scrambling to process the implications. Liam raised a hand to silence them. "Victor has been detained, and the authorities are involved. But this isn't just about him. This is about us, about the culture we've allowed to grow here. It stops now." One of the board members, an older man with a sharp expression, leaned forward. "Liam, this is serious. Do you have proof?" Liam motioned to Sarah, who shared her screen to display the documents they had retrieved from Victor's office. The evidence was undeniable. Bank statements, emails, and internal memos outlining Victor's schemes in painstaking detail. The board fell silent as the weight of the situation sank in. "We're launching a full investigation into every department," Liam continued. "I've already hired an external auditing firm to ensure transparency, and Daniel Greaves will be reinstated with full back pay and a public apology." Daniel, who had been sitting quietly, looked up sharply at that. "I don't want charity," he said. "I just want to clear my name." "You'll get that and more," Liam said, meeting his gaze. "Because this isn't charity, it's justice." The board meeting ended with reluctant agreement, though Liam could sense some lingering resistance. He didn't care. This wasn't about politics or maintaining appearances. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. As the call ended, Liam turned back to Daniel and Evan. "There's one more thing," he said. "I want to offer you a new role here, one that uses your skills and gives you the chance to rebuild." Daniel hesitated, clearly conflicted. "I don't know if I can trust this place again." "I don't blame you," Liam said. "But I'll make it worth your while. And you'll have the power to make sure nothing like this happens again." After a long pause, Daniel nodded. "All right. I'll think about it." After a long pause, Daniel nodded. "All right. I'll think about it." The next few days were a whirlwind. News of the scandal broke, and the media pounced on the story. Liam didn't shy away from the cameras. He stood alongside Daniel at a press conference, acknowledging the company's failures and pledging to make amends. It was a humbling experience, but it was necessary. For too long, he had been insulated from the realities of the lives his decisions impacted. That was no longer an option. For Daniel and Evan, the changes were immediate. Daniel was cleared of all accusations, and the company's legal team worked to ensure his record was expunged. Evan returned to school, his once haunted expression replaced with cautious optimism. Liam visited them frequently, not as a boss but as a friend, determined to ensure they had the support they needed. Victor, meanwhile, faced the full force of the law. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and numerous other crimes. As Liam watched the news coverage of Victor being led away in handcuffs, he felt a sense of closure. but also a renewed sense of responsibility. Months later, the park where Daniel and Evan had reunited became the site of a new community center, funded by Cross Global. It was a place for families in need, a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Liam handed the scissors to Evan, who grinned shyly as he cut the ribbon. As the crowd applauded, Daniel approached Liam. "I didn't think I'd ever say this," he said, his voice steady. "But thank you. For everything." Liam nodded, his expression earnest. "I'm just glad I could help." As he watched Daniel and Evan walk away, surrounded by a supportive community, Liam felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the hollow pride of success or wealth, but the deep, lasting kind that came from knowing he had made a difference. Looking out at the crowd, Liam spoke into the microphone one last time. "We all have the power to change someone's life," he said. "The question is, will we use it?"